Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of March of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates and details, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about Donetsk and South Donetsk directions. First let's talk about Heorhiivka. Today the Ukrainian sources, to be more precise the forces of 79th Air Assault Brigade, published the video how they managed to repel another Russian attack. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians using two armored vehicles, probably one tank and one personnel carrier. The tank got on the minefields. The Russians, according to the videos you can see, managed to reach the road. They managed to land the infantry and to clear the territory. A lot of mappers have already updated their maps showing Russian additional progress. So this is the progress according to some neutral mappers. So if we return back to move and if we adjust the map, so according to some sources this approximated Russian progress as a result of attack that the Russians conducted during the previous weekend and yesterday. Furthermore, before attack, the Russians started the artillery preparation by bombing the next three lines to the main area of attack, and after they suppressed Ukraine positions, they launched an offensive. Now we see that the Russians are moving further on the northern part, trying to create half encirclement of Heorhiivka. And of course the Russians are about to finish this, and the Russians are planning to make the situation when the Ukrainians gonna have just two options: either to stay in Heorhiivka and be encircled and to get into Cauldron, or to fall back and to save the personnel. Obviously when talking about Kiev, they will make an order to fight till the last Ukrainian for the cities and towns, but when talking about the soldiers, obviously sooner or later they will make a decision to fall back and to save their lives. On this video we can see another rotation or evacuation process. The Russians managed to discover the light car, and as a result of mortar strike or FPV drone strike, that evacuation machine was destroyed. Now we are moving further to the north in direction of Pobieda. Today we got very interesting video. On this video, for example, we can see the Russian tank. The Russian tank with clearing equipment, demining equipment, was moving along this tree line and was trying to demine the area and to prepare the safe road for further Russian offensive operation to the west in direction of these fields, in direction of the next defense belt. So pay attention to this, let's see, picture. This is the pool on the right corner of the video, and this is the pool on map. This is it. We see where the Russians entered the area. This is a very long video of 10 minutes how the tank was moving and how the tank was bombed by the Ukrainian mortar systems, how the tank was clearing the area from mines, a lot of explosions. If we return back to map, we're gonna see that the Russians entered this area. The Russians moved along this tree line, reached this point, then the tank turned back and start moving back towards the base. So once again, the Russians entered here, moved along the tree line. In this area the tank turned back and start moving towards Marinka. So this is it, and this video confirms the Russian progress all over this line of combat contact, all over the trenches and this tree line. So based on that map we have adjusted the configuration of the line of combat contact. Furthermore, we see that the Russians are preparing the safe road for further offensive operation, and according to that video we can make a conclusion that very soon the Russians will try to make first attempts to attack towards the next defense belt after Pobieda, to the west of Pobieda. And if the Russians are able to capture this territory, they will get the operational space, and after that the Russians will be able to start offensive to the south in direction Kashlygach River and to collapse completely Konstantinovka. Now we are moving further to the north in direction of Heorhiivka, Krasnogorovka direction. We have a lot of videos, a lot of very interesting geolocations. Before we start, I'll just remind you that according to mappers and according to different military experts, the Russians have already entered Heorhiivka from the central part and established control over this, let's say, part of all these streets like Mirnaya Street and Central Street. For now, we still haven't received any geolocations confirming this. I have adjusted this map and shown this to you just to give you better picture, better understanding of offensive operations that the Russians conducted during the previous weekend and during the previous 24 hours. Today, from this direction, we got at least 3 videos. 2 of them were published by the Ukrainian forces, by 46th Air Mobile Brigade. This is the 46th Brigade that is responsible for defense of this area. And 1 video was published by the Russians. Let's first start with the Ukrainian videos. The first video was published in the morning, and this video shown us how the Ukrainians managed to discover the movements of TOS flamethrower system, and as a result of FPV drone strike, that TOS flamethrower system was destroyed. Later we got a full version of the same video. On this video, for example, we can see 2 Russian armored vehicles heading towards Ukrainian positions, and the soldiers and FPV drone operators of 46th Air Mobile Brigade repelled the Russian attack, deal significant damage, and basically they're showing that everything was fine, that was just a regular military routine with 2 Russian armored vehicles that basically were damaged and destroyed somewhere in the fields between Krasnogorovka and Heorhiivka. So nothing special, just a regular military routine from the Ukrainian side. And if we turn back to map, according to the Ukrainians, the Russians were moving something like this. They reached the fields, and the edge positions the Russians managed to reach, according to the Ukrainian video, was somewhere here. And in this area, the Ukrainian FPV drones destroyed the abandoned Russian tanks. So that was the road, that was the way of attack of Russians by the Ukrainians. Later, right before start making the video, somewhere at 6 p.m. and later, the Russian sources published their version of the same attack, and of course that was something completely different. On this video, for example, we can see Russian convoy, at least 3 armored vehicles, 1 tank and 2 personnel carriers behind, and a little bit to the right we see additional, let's say, convoy of attack. So the Russians attacked not with 1 convoy but using 2 convoys. The Russians were moving through Marinka, were attacking from Marinka. One of the tall flame tower system was destroyed, and we saw that let's say strike during Ukrainian video, and the Russians managed to bypass the fields, they managed to clear the area, and the most important, they managed to bypass the edge position by the Ukrainians. Furthermore, the Russians managed to reach this defense belt and this tree line. Furthermore, the Russians managed to reach, and then when they got as close as possible, they started attacking this tree line with tank with a very short distance by suppressing the Ukrainian infantry inside. And after that, the Russians landed their infantry and their assault stormtroopers, and the stormtroopers started moving further to the trenches. We will not watch the final part of the video because in the final part we have lots of casualties and losses among Ukrainians. So the Russians were moving using 2 convoys, and one of the convoy managed to reach the line and to land the infantry. And according to the Russian version of the same battle, the Russians managed to establish control over this tree line. As you can see, completely different story, right? Now we see significant progress of the Russians. Let's try to understand what the Russians managed to achieve by these attacks. Before we continue this analysis, first of all, I would like to remind you that according to the Russian sources, military experts, as a result of clashes during the previous days on Krasnogorovka direction, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the southern part of the town the area that located to the south of the railways. So that was approximately the progress of the Russians by the beginning of the 11th of March. And by this attack, the Russians managed to achieve one important thing. They managed to establish fire control, probably even physical control over the main supply road that went for now it's already went from Krasnogorovka towards the main strongholds that located in the fields. This is the first stronghold, and then further to the south, the Ukrainians were able to supply these 2 defense belts, these 2 strongholds. And by the Russian progress in Krasnogorovka, they established complete control over this road, and basically they cut this supply road. But the Ukrainians still had additional supply road that went from the northwestern direction through the dam, then to the railways, and once again to Krasnogorovka. And if we return back to the Russian progress of the 11th of March, we see that from these 3 lines, from this direction, the Russians managed to establish complete control over this supply road as well. And now we can make a conclusion that Ukrainian forces that currently are located in the fields between Krasnogorovka and Heorhiivka in these 2 strongholds either encircled or appeared in operational encirclement, or even more, appeared in a cauldron. So this is the situation of the Ukrainians that located in this area. And now they have 2 options, either to fall back and to save their lives, or to stay in a cauldron and be destroyed by the Russians. Of course, Zelensky will order them to stay there and to fight till the last Ukrainian, but very likely the soldiers on the ground very soon will make a decision to fall back towards very likely Krasnogorovka. During the previous day, we saw a lot of these videos. The Ukrainians tried to attack the Russians with significant number of FPV drones, and they managed to destroy total power system. But the Russians used that situation to discover the Ukrainian FPV drone positions, and after that they destroyed them with Krasnopol strike. On this video, for example, we see the first Ukrainian base. On this video, we can see the FPV drone radar or something like communication equipment, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, that base was destroyed. A little bit to the southwest on the same area, the Russians discovered another FPV drone position, and as a result of artillery strike with Krasnopol accurate round, that position was destroyed. Furthermore, the Russians during the previous 24 hours suppressed Ukrainian positions with guided bombs, FAB 1500. On this video, we can see a very heavy explosion in central part of the stronghold with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to redeploy forces, and if it was a command center, to reduce the possibilities of Ukrainians in their, let's say, possibilities to regrouping, sending forces, and so on. The same story took place in Maximilianovka. The Russians, while attacking on the fields, managed to discover another Ukrainian FPV drone position, and as a result of Krasnopol strike, that position was also destroyed. So that was an attack that combined different types, different approaches, and now we see the results. The Ukrainians that are currently located in the fields in the main strongholds appeared in operational encirclement. So let's see what is going to be next, but this is also not the last clashes, not the final battles in the same direction. We got more updates from Pervomaiska. According to different mappers, the Russians during the day managed to answer the village itself, and according by Syriac, the Russians managed to get under control this part of the village, and later we got additional reports from some sources on the ground. The Russians captured also this intersection of the roads, and according to Russians, this territory was also captured by the Russians. So as you can see, significant progress of the Russians, and all these events took place somewhere in this middle part, in the, let's say, in the first part of the day. Very likely during the rest part of the day, the Russians managed to improve their positions, and now the Ukrainians also have options either to abandon this part of Pervomaiskaya, because there are still Ukrainians, and they can abandon this area towards Nivoyskaya, or to stay there and to appear in a cauldron or operational encirclement. Of course, when talking about Kiev, Zelensky will probably order them to stay till the last, let's say, square meter, but when talking about the soldiers on the ground, very likely they will make a decision to fall back. So this is the situation from Novomikhailivka to Pervomaiskaya. We see that Ukrainian defense belt collapsed and the Russians are moving further to the west, and we see that nothing can stop the Russians. Furthermore, just yesterday we discussed the Russian progress to the southwest of Ugledar, and today different mappers confirmed that information. Furthermore, the Russians made a decision, decided not to stop but to continue offensive further in direction of Kashlygach, the river Kashlygach, and during the previous 24 hours they made lots of strikes and attacks towards the Ukrainian trenches and fortifications in the fields, trying to suppress them and to clear the way for further offensive. Once again, I'll remind you that the main purpose of the Russians on this direction, at least to reach the Kashlygach river, to establish control over this territory, to cross Kashlygach river, and to try to attack Ugledar from the southwestern direction. So something very interesting is happening there. We'll see what is going to be next. Now we are moving to Avdiivka direction. We have few videos confirming that nothing changed during the previous 24 hours. On this video we see how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces in the village by the name of Toninka. So this video first shows the mighty Russian, let's say, firepower. From the other side, this video shows that this part of Toninka is still under Ukrainian control. The same story in the vicinity of Berdichi. The Russians were attacking the Ukrainians with Krasnopol, and if not, I'll remind you, and I point your attention, to be more precise, that during the previous months the Russians significantly increased the use of Krasnopol accurate rounds, and every single day we receive another batch of videos of the use of this type of weapon, which confirms that the Russians increased the production of this type of weapon and 10 times or even more. So the Russians were bombing and suppressing the Ukrainians. We got additional confirmation that Ukrainians lost another Abrams on this direction, and this is obviously significant reputational losses. When talking about Avdiivka direction, we got another video confirming the Ukrainian loss of MiG-29 somewhere in the vicinity of Pokrovsk. This event took place a few days ago, but today we got the video confirming that loss. As you can see, the Ukrainian MiG-29 was returning back to the base, but he was got by the Russian air-to-air missile and basically was brought down by the Russians. And now we are moving to Zaporizhzhia area. We have lots of updates, and the most important updates are coming from Chervone, Gulyai-Polye, Malinovka direction. Today we got another video. We have discussed this video in the previous update, but just to remind you that today the Russians conducted offensive operation not just in Donetsk and South Donetsk direction. Today the Russians managed to improve their positions on Gulyai-Polye direction as well, and they managed to capture additional tree lines and additional territories. This video was published by the Ukrainians. When talking about Robotyne, we haven't received, let's say, normal updates confirming the progress of the Russians. We just got a lot of videos of lots of attempts from the Russian side to attack. The Russians managed very likely to capture additional buildings, but for now it's very difficult to understand the chronology of videos that were published during the previous few days. Because Russian attacks, then Ukrainian counterattacks, then the Russians counterattacks once again, and now it's very difficult to understand what was after what. So that's why we will still keep the area as a gray zone, because for now we still don't have a normal understanding of what is the proximate control of the Russian forces on this direction. Now we're moving to Kherson area, where we got a lot of updates, and I'll remind you that Budanov, the head of Ukrainian intelligence, reported that Ukrainian armed forces are preparing for a serious operation in Crimea, said the head of main intelligence directorate Budanov. He claims that all the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Black Sea and the territory of Crimea serve as a preparatory measures for carrying out a serious operation on the peninsula. So once again, today there were two interesting cases on this area. Two barges were destroyed. The Ukrainians first attacked the Russians with the barge. Basically, they sent the barge along the Dnipro River, and the Russians later reported that they didn't destroy the barge with artillery because they discovered the Ukrainian plans. The Ukrainians sent the barge with the purpose to discover the Russian artillery that the Russians would use to attack this ship. But the Russians waited when the barge got the coast, the bank of the river, and after that they destroyed the barge with their own board, completely loaded with explosive. The Ukrainians from their side published the video how they destroyed the barge somewhere in the vicinity of Kinburn Spit. The Ukrainians claims that there was a command center and that they destroyed the command center with officers and so on, but there were no officers and it wasn't a command center. If you take a look at the map, you're gonna see that the barge was located here, and basically the Russians were using that abandoned barge, let's say from this area, with the one purpose: to control the situation in the city by the name of Stanislav, to control the situation from let's say islands in the beginning of in the end of Dnipro River. So it was something like a checkpoint, control point, checkpoint to control the situation. There were equipment, communication equipment, probably electronic warfare equipment, some video cameras, and basically the Ukrainians destroyed that very important point because the Ukrainians currently are trying to clear the area, and as we discussed in the previous videos, very likely the Ukrainians are planning to establish control over the Kinburn and Tendra Spits with the purpose to unblock Nikolaev port and to include additional area and additional port for the sea trade of the Ukrainian forces of Ukraine. Furthermore, starting off today, the Ukrainians announced a counter-sabotage operations in Odessa. Now they're trying to be very, let's say, to pay attention to very interesting behaviors of people, trying to find people who support Russia. So they just want to reduce the noise and reduce the possibilities that somebody will provide the Russian information from Odessa, because the Ukrainians are about to start their, according to Budanov, greatest, let's say, special operation in Crimea and this Kherson Spits. Furthermore, now we are moving back, to be more precise, to Avdiivka, to Bakhmut, Artyomov's direction. After very fierce clashes in Ivanovska, we see complete absence of any updates of the progress on the ground. The Russians conducting artillery preparations. They're bombing the trenches and tree lines and fortifications in the vicinity of Klishchiivka, and they're bombing the canal with FPV drones, but no updates about any other Russian progress on the ground. The Russians renewed their activity in the vicinity of Siversk, and today we got additional video of how the Russians fabbed the Razdolovka, the village by the name of Razdolovka, and from this perspective, nothing special. The Russians are bombing Ukrainian towns every single day. So what is important? But the importance we can note after increasing the number of updates. And if we increase the numbers of updates, just for March, the Russians bombed the city 3 times with different types of weapons, total and traverse systems, multi-launch rocket systems, and FABs. So which confirms that this is a clearing operation, and very likely the Russians are about to start the ground operation with the purpose to capture this town and to start offensive towards Siversk from the south. Today we got additional reports from Cherny-Yampolovka direction. As we discussed, the Russians managed to improve their positions in front of the village, and the sources continue reporting that there are very heavy clashes already inside of Terny. During the previous 24 hours, we got additional Lancet strikes against the Ukrainian forces, tanks, armored vehicles that Ukrainians were using to attack the offensive Russian forces from hidden positions. We haven't received anything from Kupiansk, just to report about Ukrainian failed attempt to attack the territory of Russian Federation, and approximately the Ukrainian possible plans of further offensive operation towards Valuki with the purpose to cut the Russian supply in the northern Kupiansk. But now, as I understand, nothing is going to work out and nothing is going to happen. So these are the situation on the ground. Lots of updates. We'll see what is going to be next. And an important thing that while the talks of Western countries about the redeployment of forces to the western part of Ukraine, that some NATO countries are already in Ukraine. The French President Macron is trying to search forces for this purpose and allies. The President of Republic of Belarus and the Minister of Defense of Republic of Belarus have begun checking the combat readiness of formations and military units. The testing is comprehensive. Personnel will have to move to designed areas and conduct a series of exercises and training. So when talking about normal language, the Belarusian forces start redeployment of their units to the border with Ukraine and to the border with Poland. So let's say it's like countermeasures against the Western aggressive policy, NATO, let's say military exercises and so on. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.